So, my name is Jane, and I'm here representing Ipsos. So, Ipsos is a market research company around the world, and we are specialists in public and social opinion research. What this essentially means is that we collect data from people like yourselves, and then we present it back to companies, businesses, and governments to help them decide and engage in new policies that are for the betterment of everybody. So I'm really lucky that I work at Ipsos Malaysia. It's a very gender diverse company. 50% of our senior management team are women, and there's no real glass ceilings. Women can progress throughout the business with no real issues. But that's not the case everywhere. I'm really lucky. So I'm here today to present you some data that we've collected in conjunction with International Women's Day. This data is going to help us understand where women fit in the world today and what we all need to do in order to make a much more gender-balanced society. So let's first of all start with identifying the top issues that are facing Malaysians today. So we asked people around the world to identify the top 2 or 3 things that they really think are impacting women. And the first 3 that you'll see here: sexual harassment, sexual violence, and physical violence. Now let's look at Malaysia, change our lens. So in Malaysia, the top issue continues to be sexual harassment. But we see workplace discrimination coming up as the second core concern that's facing women. We also notice that balance of care and home responsibilities is coming up in our 4th position. It's really quite a different layout to the rest of the world. So Malaysians have some unique issues that we need to overcome. And what I want to do today is take some time to go through a bit more detail on 3 of these issues so that we can all leave with a bit more knowledge to empower us to help make change to our world. So I'm going to start by talking about sexual harassment. Sexual harassment has had an awful lot of press lately because of the Me Too movement. And the Me Too movement has been a fantastic measure for everybody. What it's done is it's brought awareness, but it's also highlighted that sexual harassment isn't limited to the particular type of person. It affects everybody. It affects CEOs, it affects politicians, it affects celebrities, it affects the normal person. I too have a Me Too story. I'm going to share it with you because I think it helps us to understand a little bit more on the issues around sexual harassment. When I was in my early 20s and I was working as a student, I was working in a bar as a student. I needed extra income, of course. And one of my jobs was to go out and collect glasses and plates from around the bar. There was this guy who was an old guy, and he used to grab a hold of me, pull me onto his lap. He used to touch me inappropriately. He started waiting for me after I finished my shift. It was really late at night. We're talking 11, 12 o'clock at night, 1 o'clock in the morning. Had to get my boyfriend to come and meet me after work to walk home with me because this guy would just follow me the whole way. So I told my boss. And my boss was really understanding, but the problem was my word versus this guy's word. There was no evidence. There was no witness that he had seen. So he had to ask me to do kind of the unthinkable. He had to ask me to go out into the bar while he watched and let myself be harassed. That's what I had to do. It was all good. It worked out. The guy got picked up, shipped out, kicked out. It was brilliant. But this is the problem. The only way to really prove sexual harassment is to see it. It's your word versus someone else's word. And that's a real challenge to overcome, because how do you prove that it's happening? So we asked people whether or not they feel that sexual harassment reports are generally ignored. And it's really interesting. In Malaysia, more than 50% of people agree that reports are ignored. And this is just among the cases that are reported. We also know there's a huge amount of sexual harassment that isn't actually reported. Because if you think it's going to be ignored, what's the point? If there's no evidence and it's my word versus somebody else's, what's the point? And think about the impact it would have on you as an individual. If I make a report of sexual harassment against me, what impact is it going to have on my job? What impact is it going to have on my career? What impact is it going to have on my relationships, my social status, my family, my friends? The stigma that's attached to this is huge, and it's really scary. So we look at 3 possible areas where you can see impact and change. The first one is the government. So it's important to note straight away that there is no law in Malaysia prohibiting sexual harassment. It's been discussed recently, but it doesn't actually exist. And this has 2 problems. The first, it kind of normalizes the behavior. If there's no law prohibiting it, then surely there's nothing wrong with it. The second is it doesn't put any imperative or impetus onto companies and businesses to enact anti-harassment policies. There's no guide, there's no drive from the top to make sure this happens. But we all know, everyone knows, that governments take a really long time to do anything. It takes a long time to make things happen. So that's where we need to look at the second bucket, the businesses. Businesses need to have policies in place, but that's not good enough, just having a policy in place. You need to communicate that policy. You need to create avenues for people to make reports. You need to create avenues for action to be taken and for people to be taken seriously. It needs to be handled compassionately because, as we said, the implication of making a report is far-reaching. So we need to be really pushing for businesses to have these policies in place and make sure that everyone is aware of them. And then finally, it comes down to the individual, everyone in this room. If you have a situation of sexual harassment, the first person you're most likely to reach out to is a colleague, a peer, a friend. That person then becomes your support network. And we are those people. We need to support people, not judge them. We need to help them. We need to support them when they go through the whole reporting process. There's a lot of pressure on everybody, but we need to overcome the sexual harassment issues that are facing women. So that's a very heavy topic. I'm now going to move on to another one, which is workplace discrimination. So I have a couple of questions for you. Please do shout out the answers. Don't just sit there and look in silence at me. So first of all, if I was to ask you, how long do you think it will take for gender economic equality to be achieved based on the current rate? So for men and women to have economic equality. Any ideas? Never, never. Excellent. Really positive thinking going on in the audience today. Okay, so the answer, according to the World Economic Forum, is 202 years. Let's just take one moment, 202 years. Can anyone even envisage how far that is? Think where we were 202 years ago. Can anyone even do the math? It's a ridiculous amount of time. So let's see what happens to the world when we ask the world this question. First of all, nobody got anywhere near close. Nobody. Great Britain, woohoo, was kind of close, but they were still a long way off. But look at Malaysia, 20 years. Woohoo! Go Malaysians, you're going to be equal in 20 years. It's an incredibly optimistic outlook. And there's nothing wrong with being optimistic. The risk is when optimism becomes complacency. Oh, this isn't really an issue, we don't need to do anything about it, there's no need for us to change or no need for us to drive change because it's only going to take 20 years. Just for information, the same research that put the 202 years up there, Malaysia was listed 104 out of 144 countries. So we've got a long way to go here as well, and it's definitely going to take more than 20 years. So another question. How many of the top CEOs of the world's 500 top companies do you think are women? What percentage? 5. Excellent. It's 3, so not far off. Well done. 3%. So 3%, again, let's look at the global data, and go Malaysia, the most optimistic of all at 29%. The truth is that actually in Malaysia, this isn't far off. 28% of the senior management roles in Malaysia are filled by women, so it's not actually far off. But let's be honest, it's still not balanced. It's still a majority male-led. And we have one interesting statistic that blew my mind. We asked people whether or not they would feel uncomfortable having a female boss. Globally, 17% of people said they would feel uncomfortable having a female boss. Now, let's look at Malaysia. 28% of people said they would feel uncomfortable having a female boss. Break it down even further. 1/4 of Malaysian women said they would feel uncomfortable having a female boss. So we're our own worst enemies. We want to go up, we want to progress in our careers, but we don't want to be our own bosses. This number shocked me when I saw it. What stops us wanting to have a female boss? I don't have the answer. I have some hypotheses. The first and most basic hypothesis is that business historically and traditionally has been made by men for men. Secondly, there's an existing stereotype, depending who you talk to. I kind of disagree with it, being a leader myself. Female leaders are seen to be aggressive. They're seen to be arrogant, dominant, driven. They will do anything they can to get to the top. So who wants that person to be their boss? Whether or not you agree with that stereotype is your own personal opinion. Before we look into what we need to do on this, let's just take a moment to look at the balance of work and care responsibilities. Now, we all know that being a woman is really tough. I'm not saying that being a man is easy, but we're talking about women, and being a woman is really difficult. Think about the roles we have to fill. We have to be wives, mothers, daughters, housekeepers, chefs, cleaners. We are expected to do everything, including work and career aspirations. All of these things we're expected to do without any complaint. It's just a social norm, an expected norm. So we asked people, what do you think is being done to create balance between the men and women in different places? 45% of people said that not enough was being done to create balance when looking after children in the home. Now, I'm not going to suggest that all the men in the room have to run home and start looking after their kids. That would be ridiculous. But the stigma is still there. Men don't want to be seen as looking after the children in the home. And that stigma runs for both men and women. When my daughter came, we agreed, my husband and I, that he would be a stay-at-home dad while I went back to work. He took her out one afternoon shopping, and the sales assistant and him got talking, and she asked, where's my daughter's mum? Where was I? He said, well, she's at work. And the sales assistant thought it was perfectly within her rights to tell my husband that this was unacceptable, that my daughter needed to be brought up by her mother, and that I was abandoning my daughter. So that made him feel bad, of course. It made me feel terrible. And it's just wrong. It's just wrong. And just so you know, that was a Malaysian woman, but I've had the same attitude and the same response from Europeans as well. I face this regularly, being a working mum. So what do we want to do here? So again, we have our 3 buckets of responsibility. The first is government. During my research for this piece, I discovered that Malaysian government has a policy in place that ministries should provide daycare facilities for their families with kids. How many ministries have this in place? None. Not a single one. So they're talking the talk, they're saying all the right things, but are they actually doing anything? No. So start leading by example. Businesses need to start putting processes in place that enable women to come back to work, enable women and men with families to look after, to employ flexible working, to leave when they need to leave because of an emergency at home. The onus shouldn't just be on women to look after the family. Why can't a man go home to take his kid to the doctor, to relieve the nanny, whatever needs to be done? And then it comes down to the individual again. So we have the individuals. Women, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to ask for 10 minutes to have a cup of tea in peace. Just because it's an expected norm that we do everything doesn't mean we can't shout and say, help me. And men, maybe don't look after the children 24/7, but could you do the washing up? Could you help cook dinner once a week? Could you just take control of the child for 10 minutes to let your wife go and have a cup of tea? So why is this important? Well, first of all, I think it's a shocking thing that we even have to ask the question. Everyone in this room deserves the same rights, access, privileges as everyone else sitting next to them. You can't sit and say, oh, I'm a woman, I should be doing this, and I'm a man, I should be doing this. Everyone has the same rights. There's data to suggest that if men and women had equal rights in the workplace, that global GDP would increase by 26%. Surely governments and business can get behind that. There's also an interesting problem in Malaysia specifically. We know that there's a reduction in the size of working population. We have a brain drain. We also have an aging population. So the number of people who can actually work is reducing. The easiest way to bring more money into your household to cope with these and to cope with the rising cost of living, enable women to work. You might be sitting there and thinking, oh my gosh, why do I need to know this? What can I do about this, little old me? I just want to leave with one thought. You're all about to enter the workplace, or you're all in the workplace. And unless we're aware of these statistics and we all individually push for change, nothing will change. So go out there armed with information and do what you can to support everyone else. Let's get gender equality in the workplace, just because it's the right thing to do. Thank you very much.